Hello and welcome to Indianomics. My guest is the most watched governor after the most watched monetary policy, Governor Raghuram Rajan. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajan, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, in the post-policy teleconference, you all gave us a new number for the inflation estimate for March 2017. 5.4% was what Michael Patra said, March 2017. Now that's...
no, I don't think he said that.
He said that because there are several analysts who messaged me back.
Yeah.
It was 4.8% in September.
Yeah.
Then you gave us a forecast for Jan 2017.
Yeah.
And now Michael said 5.4. I mean, what is your estimate of March, Jan-March 2017?
No, look, from when we made the estimates in September to now, what has generally happened is the information that's come in has caused us to reduce our expectations of inflation, the information that has come in. Then there are risks going forward which tend to elevate our estimates, risks such as the pay commission, for example, and the evolution of food prices post two tough monsoons. So in general, I would say that if you look at our curve, it's broadly in the same place it was as in September, with a slight bias towards the downside. That's what's in the policy statement.
So the incremental information gives you a sense of lower inflation for what period? Along the curve or only for January 2016?
No, so certainly for the near term, it gives us a greater sense of where we will be. But what I'm also saying is that we had in mind some of these risks that we've highlighted here. To some extent, if you think that pulses have been more persistent over the last few months than one thought, that has been offset by the realization over the last couple of months of inflation slightly below where we expected it to be. So it's in that sense that some of the information has come in lower. Plus, if you look at oil prices going forward, that also gives a certain amount of comfort that it has stayed relatively low, because we have to see what OPEC does.
But if you take your comments on services inflation, non-food, non-fuel inflation, as well add to it, impulses from GST, 7th Pay Commission, would you be? I mean, are you still reiterating 4.8% in January of 2017?
Oh, it's in the ballpark of that number. I'm not sure that I would say exactly 4.8%, but
not 5.4.
No. Otherwise, would be somewhat off where we intend to be. I think of the factors you mentioned, such as the pay commission, some of the factors are going to be balanced by government action. Of course, the additional outlay has to be balanced by an appropriate, finding space so that the fiscal sort of deficit targets aren't breached. So that will offset some of the inflationary impulses. Some we'll have to look through, as we've said, there's some mechanical calculations.
Yes.
We have to be careful we don't overlook what is necessary to look at.
Okay.
So that we'll have to work out as we go along.
But what is the requirement of the monetary policy agreement? You have to start, your clock starts ticking only in January 2018?
1st. No, January 1st, 2016. Clock starts ticking.
At 6%?
At 6%.
And the MPFA also says that January of 2017, 5%?
No.
It doesn't say that.
That's a self-imposed movement towards the midpoint of the range, which would give future monetary policy committees sufficient room to stay within without violating. That's where we would desire to be over the medium term.
So now the 6% looks achieved, so you don't write letters now. The next exam for you is January of 2018? 4%?
No. There is actually no exam past the 6%. If you look at the details of the monetary policy agreement, we have to stay between 2 and 6. That is all that the monetary policy agreement calls for.
Okay.
However, with abundant prudence and knowing that the whole sort of range was set, keeping in mind that it would be better to be around 4. We would like to migrate towards 4 over time. But what is in the agreement, where we start writing letters and doing penance, is if we exceed 6 on average for 3 quarters.
Or undershoot 2 on an
Or
average.
undershoot 2, which I think is a little distant right now.
Okay. Well, probably even overshooting 6 for 3 quarters immediately doesn't look likely. But now let me come to the exact other side of the question, growth. Now, do you really believe the 7.4% number? Everybody will tell you, and I guess you feel yourself that it doesn't feel like 7.4%.
Well, I keep reiterating what Dr. Pranab Sen said about this, which is the new numbers can't be compared one-to-one with the old numbers. And his view was that there will be a difference, and therefore when you say it doesn't feel like, you're saying it doesn't feel like 7.4% according to the old numbers. And that was perhaps because that, put more weight on certain aspects of growth.
Nominal growth is 6% according to the GVA,
so there is
number. Look at the corporate profits of that same quarter. It was down by 3%. I can understand top line. But if you said margins should have improved, then at least bottom line should have been, it's down 3%.
Well, it depends on sector again. Some sectors are down partly because there's global deflation or overcapacity in those sectors. You would expect in those sectors both the top line and the bottom line to go down. But there are some sectors where input costs have come down substantially and output costs haven't gone down as much, so profitability has increased. So it varies. I don't think it's as uniform or as gloomy a picture as you suggest. Nevertheless, when you get into situations where your deflator is doing a lot of the walking for you, you have to be a little worried. And that's the sense in which I think you are, because we always tend to associate growth with nominal numbers. And it's hard for us to see low nominal growth but high real growth, because in fact we are in deflation.
The real growth from, clean numbers like corporate is not even, reflective of the nominal number.
Well,
that was my point.
What I would agree with is that relying a lot on deflation for your growth is problematic. It's also, there is a real question of, are we deflating by the right numbers? And are we deflating something which should be deflated by CPI, by something like WPI? Those are questions that have always been asked. We continue asking, but they assume a lot of importance when the two diverge.
Okay. Well, I think this debate will not end. So let me get to another question on growth. Where do you see growth coming next year? I mean, it doesn't look like, capex is picking up at all. And if you insist on the fiscal deficit going down to 3.5% in spite of one rank, one pension and 7th pay commission, even the public investment impulse will not be there. So next year growth is going to be tougher.
Well, first, there is a lot of cleaning up which has been going on to remove some of the legacy issues, right? Some of it is happening, in areas like power. Some of it is happening on bank balance sheets, which we are very determined to see through. So that will unclog some sectors and allow for some growth there. Then there are massive investment projects which the government has been emphasizing over time. Some PPP, some government focused. Those will start coming on stream as we go on. Those will create demand for some of the goods that the private sector also provides. Now, we've always said, capacity utilization is low, but it's about 70%. Now, the norm is not 100%, it's 75. So we need to get up some way before the private sector starts kicking in and investing. The other thing people often forget is, you can have a few years of low investment, but eventually the capital goods depreciate. And so you've got to put in new investment just to keep up or replace the old stuff. So after a few years, we've had a few years already of low investment, you would expect the investment cycle to start picking up itself. Okay. So all these would be positives. Now, of course, the virtuous cycle is then when that creates more jobs, people feel more confident, they go out and buy. Now, last is one of hope rather than knowledge. We've had 2 bad monsoons in a row. Historically, we've not had a third. Of course, in a time of climate change, one could argue anything is possible. But I would say the odds of a third bad monsoon are probably relatively small. I know, we need to think about the structural forces rather than just play the odds. But it's improbable.
You're still betting on a better growth next year.
Well, I'm hopeful. I mean, I don't lay bets on growth.
All right. No, I won't come to estimates simply because it's way far out. Let me come to the other number in the GDP.
Let me also emphasize one thing which we should stop fixating on these precise numbers, partly because, as you know, numbers get revised. We saw in 2010-11 the huge revisions. For example, one of the things we see in our data is when you look at the subsidiaries of foreign corporations, which typically don't tend to get picked up in the first single growth. Growth there, sales growth, is significantly higher than comparable firms in Indian firms. And these things are not small. They're about half in terms of sales, or I would say between 1/3 and 1/2 in terms of sales as Indian corporation. The point I'm trying to make, for a long time we didn't look at small firms. We got them late again from the annual survey of industry. And again, they tended to boost growth. So let's not fixate on the precise first estimate of growth and what. Let's instead ask, do we have the underlying forces for strong and sustainable growth? And I think we are trying to put those building blocks in place.
Okay. Well, let me fixate on another number which came in the GDP data. Exports, minus 4.7%. Not that we needed it. For 11 months it's been contracting. Aren't you guilty of keeping the rupee overvalued? 13% overvalued, even if you argue against the RER being a bad measure. It's still seriously overvalued, isn't it?
No, so if you say it's overvalued, right? Our exports should be doing terribly compared to our,
they are.
Our Asian this thing. No, we're not. So it's certainly not. A lot of countries have lower
down
exports.
Down 20%, 19%.
No, but there you're not taking into account the price effects. I mean,
but that is affecting even Chinese exports. Everybody is affected by lower prices. Chinese exports sell 6%, ours sell 19%. And what is our base?
No, but see, don't take China as your only comparison. Look at East Asia in general. Across the board, you will see exports are suffering. I'm not saying exports are in a good place, but
are you not admitting that there is an overvaluation of the rupee? Serious overvaluation.
No, but you tell me, what are the forces keeping it overvalued? Have we had huge capital inflows over the last few months?
Reasonable FDI flows. Debt flows up until 3-4 weeks ago were positive.
10 billion. 10 billion is our net accretion to the capital account. It's not anything to knock the exchange rate off tremendously. If you look at real effective exchange rate over the year, you look at nominal effective, it's been about flat. Okay. Now you're making the opposite point to what your newspapers make. Our newspapers make every day.
That's how you escape, because the newspapers say rupee falling.
Yes. No. So the bottom line here is, are we in a position of serious overvaluation? How do we measure that? If in some of the more competitive industries, we are still finding fairly strong growth. Take autos, one of the most competitive industries. Auto exports are still quite strong. Ancillary exports are strong. If you look at something like apparel exports, that's perhaps the most competitive industry in the world. So it's not as if we are suddenly getting outcompeted in areas that are fairly competitive. Where are the biggest problems? Steel. Where we have global overcapacity, right? And in fact, we are
getting killed because of the overvaluation is an additional problem for them.
No, so what I'm saying is, no, this is not the fact that our exports have fallen is not a good thing. But is it vastly different from the rest of the world, where exports in general across the world, certainly across the emerging world, have fallen tremendously over the last year?
Governor, you mentioned imports. I think that is the bigger problem. I think exports is not such a big contributor. But imports are, cheaper imports are killing tires. You can speak to MRF, the most competitive.
No, you're absolutely. But is the question the exchange rate or global overcapacity which is killing prices? It's not across the board. It's not as if suddenly we're importing a huge amount of cars.
You could make it a little better if you allowed the rupee, or you ensured a rupee depreciation. Everyone's doing that to their currency, and that's always your grouse against everyone.
What you're assuming is we have this magic button that we can press, and suddenly the rupee goes to value X, and then we press something else and it goes to value Y. What we have always done is ensure that there's limited volatility in the rupee.
Yes.
And that's been our focus. It's very hard in this day and age to say I want to be thus and such place. Furthermore, I think if you look at some of our emerging market sort of colleagues, if you will, the ones that have had serious depreciation, large depreciation, haven't gained significant competitiveness because what's happened is inflation has taken off. And so what they've got from the depreciation, they've given back from inflation. So unless you have significant credibility on monetary policy, which, you know, for a variety of reasons industrial countries seem to have, they seem to be able to engineer a depreciation and get some export competitiveness. However, emerging markets find it much harder.
No, I take your point actually, but I have to take a break. I've not finished the argument on global currencies. There is a lot, I guess, to worry about. We'll come back with questions on the inclusion of the yuan in the SDR calculation as well as the impending Fed action. All that with the Governor in a minute. Okay. Welcome back to Indianomics. My guest is Governor Raghuram Rajan. Well, Governor, the global scene, suddenly we have this inclusion of the yuan in the SDR. It was coming, but how do you see it playing out? I guess it takes effect from some time from now, but will the yuan therefore be allowed to be more market determined? Will that mean more depreciation? What should we worry about?
No, as I understand it, it's going to be in the basket from, say, October 2016. So that's still some time away. Now, what exactly does it mean? Well, first it means that in calculating the value of the SDR, the yuan will be a component, around 10%. But does it mean that the Chinese market becomes a lot more open? Do they allow outflows to the extent that would be required in an open capital market?
Are they expected to?
I think they were expected to be a lot more open as a prelude to being in the basket. But I think post that, it's not clear to me what requirements they're supposed to adhere to or whether there's a periodic re-evaluation of their case. Which then means that post getting in, perhaps, you know, the pressures may not be as much as before getting in. Now, I think it certainly is a matter of prestige that an emerging market currency is now in the basket. But beyond that, what pressure it puts on them, it's hard to say. I think they've been quite responsible in limiting the depreciation of the yuan so far. I should say renminbi. They've limited the depreciation of the renminbi. There is a lot of competitive devaluation going on in the world, and it would be problematic if the large economies sort of engaged in it to a large extent, especially for countries like ours, which doesn't focus on the exchange rate manipulation as a means of competitiveness.
What's your sense of the trajectory of the Fed? Would it be one hike and then a long pause? Just your worldview.
Well, I think they've been very careful in saying that the hike doesn't mean that there will be a rapid set of hikes after that. Now, I think that statement is made conditional on their having room to do it in a measured way. Of course, if it turns out that you know, wages start increasing quite rapidly because they're close to full employment, it's not clear they will have the room to go at a measured pace. But the intent, again and again, that has been stated is that they will go at a very measured pace.
Okay. Then if time permitting, I'll come back to the global questions. But just one point on global growth. Every year we start at, you know, well above 3.5% and it gets scaled down. How does 2016 look to you? Another anemic year?
Well, I think when we start accepting that it's going to be anemic, that's when it's going to surprise us and do better, right? But really, I don't think anybody understands why it's taken so long and why it's so slow. Of course, the words bandied around are debt overhang, deleveraging, but also people are looking at the fact that we have very low productivity growth, and we had that even before the Great Recession. So some argue that it is a continuation of that low productivity growth. We masked it by enhancing demand for a little while through, you know, drugs like debt. But now that we can't, we have to lay off the drugs. How do we actually continue growing at a reasonable pace? And I think that's what the world is looking for, which is why visitors here come and say, you have no problems, you've got plenty of growth.
Yeah, somebody called us the holy grail of growth. We have to take a break, but we are coming back with a lot of questions on the Indian banking system, which I guess requires more attention than monetary policy itself. Back in a jiffy. Welcome back to Indianomics. We've been speaking with Governor Raghuram Rajan. Dr. Rajan, the big takeaway from the monetary policy statement was not really monetary policy, but this date you gave us, that by March 2017 you want bank balance sheets cleaned up. What did you mean by that? You have a number in mind, like stressed assets should be 5%, 3%?
No. Look, I think nobody can tell you the pace at which we will set assets right and so on. But certainly we can provision enough for assets that are stressed over time. That's the regulatory sort of approach. What I think you want to look at is the whole approach that the government and the RBI have been taking to cleaning up the bank balance sheets. It's sort of, first, let's fix the governance so that administration becomes easier in the banks. Second, let's enhance bank powers so that they can actually take some of the actions that are needed to take. Third, let them recognize the problems, bring the stakeholders to the table and deal with that. And fourth, there should be enough capital to bolster their balance sheets in case they have to recognize provisions while doing all this. So this is the package that we are trying to roll out.
Yes.
The first aspect, increasing governance, is underway. The second aspect, giving powers, is largely done. Of course, bankruptcy code, if and when it, when it comes through Parliament, will be a major enhancement, but it will take its course. The third, which is recognition, is also now underway. And then the fourth is capital, which the government certainly has provided some. Banks will raise some on their own.
No, but why did you put that date? Is there something you're working towards? That date came out of nowhere. Did you think through, or you have a timetable in mind?
Absolutely. What we're trying to do is work on this, on the bank balance sheets with the banks, so that we have a finite period over which the bank balance sheets are either set the asset back on track or finish provisioning for it, such that it doesn't matter which way it goes.
You're going to give such a mandate to the banks?
We are in discussion with the banks.
Okay, so we should expect new provisioning standards.
I don't think new provisioning standards.
Higher.
What we're basically talking about is now let's complete the process of recognition. Now that you have all the powers that you need, and somebody mentioned kicking a can down the road. We have to stop that. Let's stop doing that.
But isn't that happening all the time? Dabhol is getting 525. Dabhol is a 20-year plant. How can you give it 525? Is the RBI going to pull up in this specific case?
I don't want to talk about specific cases, but we are certainly in discussion with the banks.
So is SR actually. SR is also 1995 plant to get 525.
Look, I can't talk about specific cases, but I can certainly say we're in discussion with the banks. Okay,
well, let me come to the other point which Jayant Sinha mentioned, that the NIIF money will be used something like a TARP.
Yes.
Can you add to it? What is the idea?
Clearly this is something the government is thinking through, but as I envisage it, it's not so much about providing capital to the banks. Some of TARP money was used to provide capital to the banks, but rather to provide capital in special situations where, for example, there's a promoter who can't bring in the equity, but the government, going partners with private entity, can bring in the equity into those situations and refloat a project which needs that amount of risk capital to refloat it. So some of those situations I would envisage are ones where the NIIF could play a very important role. But isn't it looking tough? How will they pick and choose? You have a CVC and a CAG. No. So that is precisely why I've always said any entity of this kind cannot be owned by the government. It has to be privately owned, perhaps with government sort of co-financing, but less than would make it in the public sector. It has to be driven by people with the right incentives, with the right capabilities, so that public money is not wasted, but also that it can operate in a flexible way and doesn't have to. So it is
a little confusing. What is the structure you all have in mind?
I think it would be privately owned. That's as an
and take government money. NIIF would be government
co-financed. So it would not be a one-way street. You know, government takes the risk and the private sector gets the profits. It would be co-financing with some sort of financing.
When does it
you'll have to ask
get established?
But that is part of the whole process of revitalizing the banking sector. I would presume sooner rather than later.
And you have an idea of what the kitty might be?
I think the numbers that were mentioned initially were 20,000 crores.
For NIIF it was 20,000. That entire amount is envisaged to be used in this fashion.
Now how much leveraged that would be remains to be seen. But I mean, I think all that is in the process of being discussed.
Are you convinced that the worst or the NPL size will at least increase at a decreasing pace, or are we still going to?
Look, I'll make the same statement as I made with growth. The important point is to have the process in place to solve the problem, and we are steadily getting all the pieces together so that the problem can be solved. Now, the pace at which it will get solved, have we seen the peak? Is it behind us? How much is it behind? I've always said it's hard to tell, and we'll only know, you know, a year or two.
You are in a better position to say it than anyone else. I mean, you'll have the CRILIC with you. You have the SMA.
But remember, the world is a moving object. That things are changing all the time. I mean, did you see the extent of overcapacity in steel a year ago? I mean, this is a sudden slowdown in China has suddenly thrust a whole lot of industries into, you know, greater difficulties. So I think it's overly optimistic to say that we know everything there is to be known. Things will keep hitting us. Important to have the procedures to take care of it, and that's what we're working on.
Okay. Don't you think banks need more capital? Will you be pressuring, or will you be urging, requesting the government to give a little more this year itself? Because otherwise they will not be able to lend.
No, they do. For now, demand for bank loans is relatively muted, which is why there is limited pressure. But we have to take into account that as the recovery gains steam, that demand will increase. So we have to make sure, and this is again why we have to get the banks to clean up sooner rather than later. Bank capital, of course, the government has promised 25,000 crores this year, 25 next. And my sense is that if there is a need, it will be available. But we also have to make sure that it's used properly, that what is put into a bucket doesn't leak out from the other side. So we have to be careful. We owe it to the taxpayer.
Why did you say 2017? You will be there as RBI governor then?
No. Look, you're bringing in an entirely different this thing.
I was hoping you would tell me if I caught you unawares.
The point about 2017 is it gives us a reasonable period in which to undertake what we need to do. That's all.
Okay, no, that was enlightening. I have more questions on the state of the banking system. Back in a minute on what will be the impact of payment banks on the legacy banking system. We are in discussion with Governor Raghuram Rajan. Can I'll start? Okay. Welcome back to Indianomics. We've been speaking with RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan. Governor, payment banks, I was extremely excited that very capable entities, cutting-edge companies are being given, and not one but 11 licenses. Now, the first question that comes to the mind is, how are you going to allow them to open bank accounts? They already do KYC. For instance, the telecom guys, Idea, Airtel, Vodafone, have already done KYC. Can they just open a bank account because the KYC is done? On the day they get the license, can they just send a message that if you answer yes, then your account is opened? Is it going to be as simple as that?
Well, first, I think the extent of KYC that's done for a telecom account can be different from that which is required for a banking account.
That was my fear.
Now that said, the bank KYCs are being integrated into a common KYC pool. So it's not unthinkable that by the time these payment banks come on board, they'll be able to tap into the central KYC and say, thus and such person, well, every household is now linked through PMJDY, there should be a KYC associated. Can I pull that off? Aadhaar could work as a KYC for the amounts that the payment banks handle in the account. So there are different ways that this can be done. It may not be directly the mobile KYC that's already been done, but there could be a bank sufficient KYC which exists somewhere.
You know, there was an RBI rule sometime back, I think 2004 or 2005, that for no-frill accounts, really you don't, you know, it's almost no KYC.
Yeah.
So why can't you allow
self-declaration?
Self-declaration.
So
why can't you allow? I mean, the whole problem is even SBI has only 50 million accounts.
Yeah.
Idea has 168 million accounts.
Yeah.
Airtel has what, 250 million accounts. We would have financial inclusion, you know, in a jiffy if you allowed it.
So
will you all be stuck and make this another bureaucratic quagmire, this KYC?
No, I'm telling you there are ways around it already. eKYC, then you said 160 million and 80 million. There are 900 million going up to 1 billion Aadhaar accounts. So you can do Aadhaar, and Aadhaar immediately gives you enough KYC to open a bank account. So,
but then the court might put a spoke in the wheel, isn't it?
No, I think on a voluntary basis, if you give your Aadhaar, there's no problem to. I mean, this is not an entitlement and so on. That it's just another form of ID. It's one of the acceptable forms of IDs. I'm saying that the bureaucratic sort of roadblock you're fearing doesn't exist. That in fact it can be done quite easily.
So maybe 18 months or whatever, 15 months down the line, when these telecom guys open their bank accounts, can we expect that we are going to see a quadrupling of bank accounts? Maybe there will be multiple accounts, but
I would hope so. I would hope so. And remember, we're a dynamic regulator, so if there are problems, we'll see what the problems are and adjust accordingly. The whole objective here is to enhance inclusion and not to create roadblocks. Okay. And to some extent, if there are roadblocks, we will work on them. See, we emphasize too much documentation up front also.
Yes.
That there is also a need to monitor accounts. Perhaps a lot of the action can be if you say, okay, I'm going to do very minimal KYC up front, but then I'll make sure that if there's excess activity of the wrong kind in this account, we will take action. So different ways of dealing with the concerns that people have, and I think we can work with banks on that.
Okay. How do you see the mid-cap banks, PSU and private, say, especially the old private banks, coming up to speed with this competition? Could it sound the death knell of many of these banks? They have not even responded. A large number of mid-cap banks, and this is ownership neutral, have not even responded. They don't tell you that we can open your account in 4 minutes and 5 minutes. Very few people have given that, have shown that proactivity. Do you fear major casualties?
Well, first, the competition hasn't really started as yet. It's on its way. Second, there are some mid-cap banks which are doing quite well. I don't want to take names again, but they have revamped themselves. And remember, the small finance bank is essentially a mid-cap bank, except that these guys are used to dealing with small guys and have figured out operational structures that are efficient, low cost, and so on. My hope is, yes, this competition will make these people sort of look towards where they can gain advantage, and I would sense it's really in the small and medium industries where they can make a big difference, and they will utilize their capabilities there.
Okay, so you see a lot of
I see some churn. There will be churn. Whether it's consolidation, I mean, you may lose your soul if you're a small or medium-sized bank by merging with a large bank. But it may be that management changes or they get fresh investors who take them in certain directions, or they themselves have a change of heart. I don't think that things will remain as they are. There will be change.
Okay, well, more on that. We have to take a break, but I have an altogether different set of questions for you in a minute after this break. Can we get back? Okay. Welcome back to Indian Office. We've been speaking with the Reserve Bank Governor Raghuram Rajan. Governor,
let me just interrupt you one. I mean, one entity which I'm interested in watching. are these online exchanges, marketplaces, because they have access to small entrepreneurs and their sales and so on. And so some of them are already talking about making loans. Now we're sort of trying to look at that carefully to make sure we understand it. But, you know, who better to lend sometimes than somebody who has a full picture of your cash flows and knows who you're billing and what your monthly sales are. So that is an opportunity that with the right tie-ups or with the right, you know, with the right bank, with the right distinct player or the right NBFC, could be a big source of new financing for NBFCs and for your small handicraft maker sitting in Srinagar who's making carpets but needs a bigger market. He could get both the market as well as financing through these kinds of means.
You mean the guys like Paytm?
I'm talking about your Snapdeals and your Flipkarts and all those guys, or Paytm, or you know, a whole variety of entities have created online marketplaces. And they're selling a whole variety of products.
And you are looking at rules to make it easy for them to give credit?
Let's put it this way. We are looking at some entities have already started. We're trying to look at this to understand this better. It's still small. But are there ways we can facilitate the joining up of the information and the control they have over these entrepreneurs with financing? Should it be them? Should it be a separate entity? Should it be a bank? How do we actually make this work?
At the moment, you're not allowing payment banks to give loans, but you will allow them to be a DSA for an NBFC.
Exactly.
That's how you see them playing out.
Yes.
Okay. Well, actually, I was coming to another question altogether. The annual report and the dividend that you gave the government. I mean, 65,000 crores.
The what report?
Your own annual report, Reserve Bank annual report.
Okay.
The dividend that you gave the government was a whopping 65,000 crores. Doesn't this infringe on RBI independence and autonomy? I mean, all the while governors were fighting with the finance ministry not to give more than 10,000 crore. How come you gave so much?
So what we have to do is figure out how much we need for our balance sheet. Okay, of the profits we make every year, we pass on a certain amount to the government, and in the past we were taking some to our balance sheet as sort of squirreling away capital for the future. Okay. Now, this was done under a variety of rules of thumb, arrangements, board-approved arrangement, of course, but which didn't amount to a significant whole. So what we did was we asked Mr. Maligam, or one of our most respected board members, to essentially figure out how much capital we needed on a sort of modern first-rate basis, using the methods that were used elsewhere. I think they did a quick job, his committee, in trying to estimate what capital we needed, and concluded we could pay out our dividends, our profits, for the span of 3 years, while still maintaining enough capital buffer to protect the bank against all these things. Most recently, we have done a value at risk analysis of the bank's balance sheet to understand how much capital we need. This is state-of-the-art, checked with people like BIS. In fact, we are one of the few banks ahead of the curve on this. And we have come up with some numbers. And the board has said that you will keep this amount, essentially it would like the highest rating. Okay. Enough capital to get a AAA rating in international markets, and a buffer in case there is a need, there is systemic risk that we need to pay down, and the rest can be paid out to the government. That still allows us enough room to pay the 67,000 crores that we paid out this year. However, the precise contours of the agreement on dividend has to be finalized with the government. We've made presentations, we're talking, and the board has given us some guidance. Ultimately, this will be an agreement with the government which we'll take going forward.
What is this percentage of capital that is globally accepted as GMP?
Well, let me put it this way. Right now, the RBI is one of the best capitalized central banks in the world.
Okay.
Even after paying the 67,000 crores as dividend.
And you will, you're sure future finance ministers will allow you to be that capitalized?
No, I think
because
it
once
is a
you
board
raise
decision.
blood, the fear is that...
Which is precisely why we need a a method, a systematic way of doing this, which is what the sort of framework for determining bank capital will provide us. So that is the framework that is being discussed with the government right now, and the board has expressed its, after all the board determines the dividend. Government appoints the board, but it's a board driven bank. So the board has said that it intends to keep this as the guideline on which it will declare dividend, and that was what it followed in declaring this year's dividend.
So the big fear is that if the future years when the Reserve Bank doesn't make profits, will it be just forced to keep up with the previous year's numbers?
No, so we have made some suggestions on dividend smoothing to the government, that if rather than have peaks and falls, that it be smooth. But the reality of all central banks is over time, as we move towards electronic money, we won't have the kind of profits that we have today. So, it will start coming down. Of course, in India so far, the usage of cash, which is where we make our profits, has been going up. But at some point it will dwindle. So we need to keep in mind that far from financing the government, 10, 15 years from now, the government may have to finance us.
Okay, that's not very good for your autonomy, is it?
No, but
you should be putting away more money.
Right now we tax the public through seigniorage. Eventually the government will have to tax the public to pay for these essential services. This is when people no longer use cash. It's quite some way away. But it is a possibility that, in Western countries, the usage of cash is starting to come down, and central banks are thinking about where they make the money.
Well, I must be running out of time. Just a few questions on gold. The sovereign bond scheme, how does it make the country secure from the citizens buying gold? Instead of the citizens buying gold now, the government will have to buy gold to pay back when the bond matures. What's the whole point of this bond scheme? No,
so you're asking a very good question. Does it substitute or does it push forward in time? So if the government, if somebody bought a gold bond and the government wanted to be fully hedged, it would go out and buy the equivalent amount in gold today, so it doesn't actually deal with the problem of demand. So the only way this sort of works in reducing demand is if somebody wanted to buy gold in order to keep it as an investment, decided they rather buy a gold bond because they get some interest on it and the interest rate is quite attractive, and stayed with it, but the government, instead of hedging the gold by going out and buying gold, took the gold risk on its balance sheet.
But that would be foolish. So you did it at $1,000 now, and we've seen 1950 just about 24 months back.
Well, so the government will have to manage gold price risk as we go forward, and it's something that it will have to account for in its budget, because if the gold price starts going up and if we issue a lot of gold bonds, it will be something that it will have to account for.
Well, if the scheme is successful, it can mean bad news for the government. If too many people did this and if gold prices rose,
but remember,
it will be a manufactured foreign exchange crisis.
No, so it won't be. You don't have to buy and give gold. You will give the rupee equivalent of gold. So people don't necessarily need to go out and buy gold at that point. But the point you're making is the right one. There is risk involved in this, which the government will have to hedge as the gold scheme becomes large enough. Now, fortunately, to hedge, you don't have to buy 100% of the same quantity of gold. You can hedge with lower amounts of gold, but it is something that we will have to pay attention to as we go forward.
All right, Governor, I believe we've run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on CNBC.
You're most welcome.